よし、この調子でどんどん行くぜ。ここは俺に任せとけ。音速で決めるぜ。へへ、ヘイルス、ナックルス、全速力で突っ切るぜ。
Sonic Robo Blast 2!
When it comes to media franchises that have had an immense impact on my life, none have had the same ripple effect on me as Sonic the Hedgehog. Ever since I was a little kid, this little blue rat has been a massive inspiration for me in the things I create. Seriously, I can't understate how much Sonic has influenced my life. It's, honestly a little scary. And as a kid with an unhealthy obsession with a piece of media, I had a constant need to experience as much of it as possible. Whenever I couldn't afford a new game or there was a dry spell in the main series, I would look to the internet for something to sate my hunger with. Luckily, I was growing up during the golden age of flash games and fan games, and I had the pleasure of experiencing tons of classics from the Sonic fanbase. Ultimate Flash Sonic, Sonic FGX, the Lake Pepper trilogy, and more. Throughout all the games I've played in my life, though, there's one fan game that's stuck with me since youth and remained my absolute favorite. And that game is Sonic Robo Blast 2. Robo Blast 2 actually has quite the storied development history. The original Sonic Robo Blast was released all the way back in 1998, and was a 2D platformer that, hasn't aged super gracefully. But Sonic Robo Blast 2 was initially supposed to stick super close to its blueprint, being developed in the same software, Games Factory, and even reusing Sonic's sprite set from that game. Come the turn of the millennium, however, it was eventually moved to a modified version of Doom Legacy and became a 3D platformer instead of a 2D one. On December 7th, 2019, over 20 years after the original Games Factory version started development, the massive 2.2 overhaul was released, turning it into the game we now know today. And that wasn't the end. There's still changes and content planned for the foreseeable future. This game has not exited development yet. But I don't really want to focus too much on the development history. I only gave a brief rundown because stuff like that is the job of people who are much more experienced and patient with that sort of thing than me. No, this video is a love letter to Sonic Robo Blast 2. I'm going to be going over all the zones in detail and covering as much of the content as possible. Upon booting up the game, you're greeted by an intro cutscene that explains the plot. A few months after the end of the first game, Eggman discovers an asteroid hovering above the planet known as the Black Rock. Upon realizing the immense power held within, he quickly makes it his new battle station and as a show of dominance, decides to blow up Green Flower Mountain. His sudden appearance wakes Sonic, who races off in an attempt to stop the attack, but he arrives just a hair too late. Eggman appears in front of them to taunt them and then sicks two robots on them. After easily dispatching of them, Tails hacks into one to discover their mission objective: retrieve the Chaos Emeralds. With their goal clear, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles set off to grab the emeralds and stop Eggman's latest scheme. It's a simple plot, but given how heavily this game is rooted in the classic series, it didn't really need to be super complex. Upon attempting to start a one-player game, you'll be given the option to go through a brief tutorial where Amy guides you through the controls. If you've never played this game before, then please, for the love of God, play the tutorial. This game is very different from other 3D Sonic games, and your muscle memory can only carry you so far. I would also recommend changing your playstyle to manual in the control settings if you plan on playing with a keyboard and mouse, which is my preferred way to play the game and also the way I believe the game was designed to be played. Unlike your standard 3D Sonic game, where movement is independent of the camera, in this game, the camera is paramount to your movement, as a result of it being built in an FPS engine. Setting it to manual makes it so that the camera doesn't move with you when you press a directional key. Instead, you have full control over where it goes, and it won't move without your input. Another fun little quirk of this game's engine is your control over your airspeed. Unlike a standard Sonic game, you have pretty fine control over your airspeed and can pick up and lose as much speed as you need to. Combined with things like air strafing and the whirlwind shield, you can achieve some pretty amazing shortcuts. But there's never a point in the levels where advanced knowledge of these things is required to progress. After finishing the tutorial and choosing your save file, you'll be given 4 different options for characters to start with: Sonic and Tails together, Sonic alone, Tails alone, and Knuckles. All characters share the same basic movement stats, barring Knuckles, who has a standard lower jump, so there's no need to worry that your favorite is any slower than the rest. All 3 of them have access to the spin dash, allowing them to gain a burst of speed from a standstill, slip under small gaps in walls to find secrets and new routes, and roll while moving to gain immense speed down slopes. Sonic is the most technical of the 3, and my personal favorite. He lacks any abilities that grant him height in exchange for the ability to quickly gain speed and redirect his momentum via his jump ability, the Speed Thock. This makes Sonic the hardest to get a handle on, but his ability to maintain constant high speeds also makes him highly rewarding. When paired with Tails, he gains access to the Tails carry by standing in close proximity and jumping, which is the only form of vertical mobility he has access to. He's also capable of turning super after collecting the Chaos Emeralds. This operates like it does in the classic games, where he gains a massive stat boost while draining rings. Unique to SRB2 is the ability to float while holding spin in midair, falling if you ever come to a stop. Tails is meant for beginners. He can fly by mashing jump in midair, granting him unmatched vertical mobility and the ability to avoid any platforming scenario he doesn't want to have a part in. However, his power over vertical space comes at the cost of speed, as flying normally massively reduces Tails' velocity. There are tricks you can perform to get around this, however. Tricks I don't know how to do, but they exist nonetheless, giving more experienced players a way to keep up the pace. He's completely incapable of using the Chaos Emeralds at all, however, lacking a super form or any other tangible benefit for collecting them outside of a good ending. Knuckles is the in-between to Sonic and Tails. With his classic gliding and climbing, Knuckles is well equipped to explore stages to their fullest. His unique ability to break walls by running through them and his shorter jump mean that he's either capable of or required to take completely unique routes through stages. Just like Sonic, he's capable of turning super with the Emeralds. The standard stat increases in Ring Drain apply to Knuckles, but additionally, he can also create shockwaves in landing from a glide or attaching to a wall. These shockwaves destroy any enemies that happen to be nearby. Once you've picked your character, it's off to the races in the first level, Green Flower Zone. It's your run-of-the-mill first Sonic stage. It's got the aesthetic of Green Hill and a difficulty to match. Act 1 is short with zero pits or spikes to speak of. Enemies are spread out, and the main path is pretty straightforward. Despite that lack of difficulty, the stage does have a fair bit of depth. There's a path at the beginning you can take where you spin under a small opening. Continuing to go up will lead you to an upper area where you can take a spring to get an Emerald token, but we'll talk about those in just a bit. And then in the middle of the stage, there's a path you can take that shaves a few seconds off your time, and if you're really good, you can get to the top of the waterfall at the start of the stage. Other than that, first act is pretty simple. Since there isn't really much to talk about, let's take a quick detour to talk about collectibles, since you're going to see all the main ones here. In terms of minor collectibles, you have your standard stuff like rings, speed, shoes, and invincibility. However, instead of the standard shield and elemental shields, SRB2 has a host of new shields, almost completely original. There are 5 different shields you can find in the main campaign, each with a unique ability that can be activated by pressing the spin button in midair. The Attract Shield is a mix of the Electric Shield and the Gold Shield from Sonic 3D Blast. While held, you gain a passive immunity to electricity and ring magnetism. Its shield ability allows Sonic to perform a homing attack, making it easier to defeat enemies. Like the Electric Shield, it shorts out and disappears if you ever decide to take a swing. The Force Shield is closest in function to a standard shield, but instead is able to take 2 hits. Its shield ability allows you to halt all of your aerial momentum. A bit basic, but hey, 2 free hits is always nice. The Armageddon Shield is a standard 1-hit shield, but upon taking damage or pressing spin in midair, you can blow everything to smithereens! It's, not really that useful. You can just use the iframes from taking a hit with any other shield to go through enemies. The Whirlwind Shield allows you to double jump, which gives Sonic access to new routes and allows the other 2 characters to have less start and stop aerial mobility. And finally, we have the Elemental Shield, also known as Disappointment Incarnate. It has both the fire resistance of the Flame Shield and the underwater breathing of the Aqua Shield, with neither of the active abilities that make those 2 fun to use. Instead, possessing a Ground Slam that kills all your momentum, creates a small ring of fire around you, and has basically no purpose for mobility. I hate this thing. Anyways, moving on from the minor collectibles, we have the 2 major collectibles, Emblems and Emerald tokens. Emblems operate similar to the first adventure game. You can obtain them either by beating certain ring and time attack records in Record Attack, or finding them hidden throughout the main zones and special stages. There are 200 in total, and passing certain milestones unlocks new stages and other little goodies that I'm gonna save for way later. Despite how long I've played this game, though, I've never actually gotten all 200. That's right, I'm a fraud. Sound the alarms and boo me off the stage, just know I won't be leaving. The other major collectible are Emerald tokens, and they're how you access the special stages. You'll find them dotted around the first 2 acts of each zone, usually around 2 to 3 tokens. Some of them require a keen eye for finding alternative routes, others require a bit of outside-the-box thinking, and some of them make me want to rip my hair out. Trust me, we'll get to that one. Collecting one banks it until you beat the act, and when I say banks it, I'm talking like Majora's Mask quantum banking. You can reset to a checkpoint way earlier in the level and still have it. And there's also no limit to how many you can be holding in an act, so you could potentially have all the emeralds before the end of the 3rd zone. When you finish an act, you'll cash in your tokens and be taken to a special stage. If you've ever played Knights before, then these will be right up your alley, and they're my personal favorite special stages in any Sonic game, fan-made or otherwise. The goal is simple. Collect blue spheres until you reach a quota, upon which you break open a capsule and rush to the exit. You're on a timer, but it doesn't really become strict until the last few stages. You can consume Boost Meter to drill dash forward, which grants you greater speed at the cost of control. You also have access to a break, which helps in collecting the various power-ups scattered through the stages. You can paraloop to magnetize nearby spheres and reveal hidden power-ups. Each of the stages is made to match one of the main zones in terms of aesthetics, and the later ones even have hazards that either resemble or are taken straight from the main zone. Reaching the exit after breaking open the capsule rewards you with a Chaos Emerald. Collect all 7 for the good ending, and the ability to turn super as Sonic and Knuckles. The usual stuff. Anyways, back onto the main zones. Green Flower 2 isn't really that much more complex than the first act. It introduces spikes, its enemies are in slightly more precarious places, and the water near the end of the stage can waste your time if you slip up and fall into it. At the very end, there's also a spring that requires you to time your jump or else they'll slam you into a fish battanic jumping from the water. It isn't difficult by any means, but it's a quaint little challenge to end the first zone on. Of course, Tails and Knuckles can just both completely ignore it. Act 3 is the first boss, and per usual for first zone bosses, it's not very hard. Eggman floats around and occasionally fires a laser. If you hit him, he boosts off to either the left or the right. If you're good at tracking his movements and reacting to them, then this boss fight's pretty easy. You can just loop him until death. After taking enough damage, he'll enter his pinch mode. During this, he'll upgrade his laser attack to shoot 3 waves of 3 lasers. If you're dumb and aggressive without the reactions to back it up, like me, you're probably going to take a hit here since he fires a lot faster as well. If you have the reactions, or just play it even a little safe, then this is a pretty easy first boss for a relatively easy intro stage. Our next zone is Techno Hill, which takes inspiration from Chemical Plant. And much like that zone, I don't exactly have a friendly relationship with it. I'm not super big on the music or the aesthetic, but it's the staged gimmick that really gets to me. This stage introduces the Goop, which is SRB2's take on the chemicals from Chemical Plant. It isn't featured super prominently in Act 1, it's more just a punishment for falling in some spots in the act, and also leads to an annoying Emerald token if you're playing as Sonic. No. It's Act 2 where the Goop gets irritating. The way it works is that when you jump into it, you sink. The higher you jump, the lower you sink, and the higher you get launched when you get back out of it. What makes this annoy me so much is the fact that you're considered airborne the entire time. So if you land in it at the wrong time, you have to wait for your character to rise out of it and then settle back down into their idle position. You can only use your jump action or shield ability if you have one. Otherwise, it's the waiting game, and my friends can attest to this. I hate unnecessary waiting. But there is one thing. One specific thing that drives me up the wall with the Goop. And it's this Emerald token. This one right here. I got it on my first try while recording footage, but it usually takes me a good 4 to 5 tries because you need to very specifically control your speed coming off the spring. And every time you miss, you have to slowly rise back out of the Goop and then try again. It is so tiresome, and it made me absolutely hate this gimmick. On the other hand, there's the boss. This one's pretty similar to the first. Eggman flies around and shoots slime projectiles at you, and every time you hit him, he reverses direction, increasing both his movement speed and the speed at which he shoots projectiles. When he enters pitch mode, he instead starts hopping around and shooting waves of goop. I'm gonna be honest, this is somehow easier than the first boss. You do run the risk of hitting the slime while it's on the floor, but you can play this one pretty mindlessly and get away scot-free 80% of the time. I think that comes from the fact that you always know where he's gonna go when you hit him, and the pinch phase makes his movement even more linear. Luckily, my opinion on Deep Sea Zone is much more favorable. It's the dedicated water level of the game, and my opinion on it has fluctuated quite a bit over the years. Before we start talking about the zone itself, though, I just want to take a moment to admire the aesthetics. The colors, the sunken ruins, the underwater caves, it all comes together to make this absolutely gorgeous looking zone. Act 1 is a lot closer to Aquatic Ruin or Hydro City in terms of pacing. You never really have to enter the water outside the very beginning and the very end. Proper routing and timing makes quick work of this stage, and the short water section in the end can be beaten without touching a single air bubble. Trust me, I do it all the time. Act 2 is where my opinion has changed massively, and it was only a relatively recent shift, as I was recording the video in fact. I used to hate this act a ton. I thought the constant underwater sections hampered the pace and it was just too slow. But playing it again for this video made me realize something. The constant modded character playthroughs I've done have kind of ruined my view of this stage. The 3 default characters are actually incredibly well equipped to traverse this stage without too much hassle. Sonic's Speed Thock allows him to easily maintain speed underwater, Tails can swim and fly out of the water, and Knuckles can similarly glide and climb to get out. Realizing that made me like this stage a lot more. There's a water slide maze at the end that I wasn't too big on, but after the first time it isn't too hard to traverse and Knuckles can just straight up ignore it via his unique route. After a couple of playthroughs, it's probably up there with Hydro City Zone as one of my favorite water stages. I also absolutely adore the set piece at the end of the stage. Jumping on a spring and launching yourself up this massive structure is just way too cool to me. This is also the stage where the bosses start to get a little more complex, for better and for worse. Trust me, you'll see why I say that in the next zone. The fight sets you up in a large room with grates on the floor. Eggman will pop up from one of the grates, fire a ring of electricity, and then a volley of missiles. Hitting him or taking too long to do so will have him retreat back under the grates. Once he reaches pinch mode, decoys will spawn and also shoot missiles at you. You can identify the real Eggman either by his appearance or through the origin of the electric ring, as the decoys will only shoot missiles and not the electric ring. Ironically, the most complex boss so far also probably took the least time to explain. Continuing the trend of opinions changing over the time, we've got Castle Eggman Zone. I used to absolutely hate this zone, and while I'm still not super big on the second act, I've certainly come around on the first one. It introduces one of my favorite stage gimmicks in the whole game, the catapults. The way they operate is simple, but using them well makes running through the stage way more fun. You simply run into one, it captures you, and you press jump whenever you want to launch out of it. The timing of your jump changes both the height and distance of the launch. Proper use of the catapults allows you to access alternate routes and fly over massive chunks of the level. And this gimmick is what allows Sonic specifically to get access to some of the higher up routes. Obviously, Tails can just fly to reach the same spots, and Knuckles' glide gives him consistent access to massive skips, but the catapults also allow you to go much faster than either of those options. Act 2, however, sort of muddies the zone for me. It's super big and filled with really tricky hazards, so navigation is a bit of a pain. I still haven't quite figured out a good route for getting through it quickly, but I think time will improve my opinion of this act as well. But the boss. Oh, the boss. I mentioned during the Deep Sea boss that we would soon understand why the bosses getting more complex was for better and for worse. And this fucker right here is the exact reason why. Strap in, folks, because Mirai's about to take you on a field trip that will leave you exhausted and frustrated alongside me. The setup is like this. Eggman is in the center of the arena, blocked by a cage and surrounded by spinning spike balls. You need to avoid the spike balls and press the buttons scattered around the arena to lift the cage. After that, you get one hit before the cage falls back down and the rotation of the spike balls reverses. Every hit causes some of the ground to break away and requires another button to be pressed until all three are activated. The annoying thing is that between every hit, there's a bit of downtime after the cage comes back down where you can't do anything. It's only a few seconds each time, but it adds up and makes the fight take longer than it reasonably should. And then there's the pinch mode. After you've landed enough hits, Eggman will fly up and the buttons explode to reveal springs. You need to jump up to the stands and hit Eggman as he travels around the perimeter of the arena. Fuck up your timing, you fall down and have to jump back up. If you get too close to an egg robo in the stands, you fall down and you have to climb back up. If you hit him and accidentally launch into an egg robo, you fall down and have to climb back up. Not to mention that some of the egg robos have a small radius where they can chase you down and hit you. This means that you have to play slowly and carefully. This wouldn't be a bad thing if this boss already wasn't a million years long and completely unfun to fight. Sadly, I'm gonna have to stay a curmudgeon for a bit because the next zone is Arid Canyon Zone. I hate this zone. It is my least favorite zone in the entire game. But before we get into that, I want to shine a bit of positivity and talk about the one thing I like about this zone. I absolutely love Act 1's music. In fact, this entire game's soundtrack is phenomenal. The revamped 2.2 soundtrack has some genuine bangers, taking the old midis and breathing new life into them with brand new arrangements and even some major shakeups to the original compositions. I want to just take a moment to highlight a few of my favorites before we dip back into 2000's Angry Reviewer territory. You can download the soundtrack for free on the official SRB2 website, and I highly recommend you do so. I'll leave a link in the description. Anyone who is a fan of Sonic music should have this soundtrack downloaded onto their computer. So, back to Arid Canyon. I don't like this zone. I'll say one other positive thing about it. I like how parts of it evoke old Looney Tunes cartoons, what with the TNT everywhere, the painted tunnel that leads you to a hidden route by blowing up that TNT, this section where you need to reveal another hidden route but you can get crushed by an anvil if you don't pay attention. Other than that though, I don't like the desert aesthetic, and I think its gimmicks lack any real depth. And in the case of the one I'm about to talk about, it just ain't any fun. So yeah, let's talk about the reason I dislike Arid Canyon so much. The ropes. The ropes are pretty simple in terms of design. You jump on them and they carry you around. What's annoying is how fucking slow they are. I stated earlier that I hate waiting, but these don't just make you wait. No. These kill any sense of flow you could have built up, especially at the end of the act. Let's focus on that. As Tails or Knuckles at the end of the act, you don't even need to bother with these. You can just fly or glide over the first pit and ignore the entire last platforming section. As Sonic or any character without vertical options, however, you have to take the ropes. And the ropes are not just slow, they're finicky. I've had multiple runs where the hitboxes of the ropes led to me just dying over and over and over, game over after game over, continue after continue, because they make 0 sense. And you've got to go across like 4 of these for one pit, and then an extra few to reach the end of the level. It's so annoying, and it really doesn't help that the rest of the level didn't exactly wow me. And then the Act 2 just kind of bores me. There's this one section of the level with falling platforms that I like, but it doesn't last that long. The mine carts are basically just a glorified and pretty easy QTE, and the music puts me to sleep. Don't get me wrong, it's a good song. I actually really like it. But putting it in what I consider to be the most boring stage does not exactly help with it. And as the cherry on top, the boss. Breaking our streak of Eggman fights, we have Fang, Knack, the weasel hunting sniper. But you could just call him Fang. I still don't have a solid opinion on this boss because my mileage is entirely based on how much rage I built up in the preceding acts and how much that affects my play. On the best days, I think he's kind of funny. At worst, his movements make me incredibly frustrated. I will say that I love the train setting, and the way the car falls apart and allows you to see the horizon as you speed across when you enter pinch mode is amazing. But let's talk about the actual fight. Uniquely, Fang isn't actually in the arena when you spawn in. Instead, he pops out of a box in the middle and freaks out a little before the fight starts. If you're quick, you can actually score a free hit here. After that, he bounces around the train for a bit before either throwing a bomb or firing off his pop gun. You can dodge both of these attacks either through quick movement or by hiding behind cover to break his sightline. He'll then laugh and leave himself open. If you track his movements well enough, you can actually prevent him from ever attacking, either by smacking him out of the sky or hitting him as he lands. Once you enter pinch mode, the train car falls apart and he begins dropping bombs as he jumps around. He doesn't become any more threatening by doing this, but intercepting becomes riskier since you could potentially bounce off and fall out of the arena. After defeating him, he jumps from the train and very abruptly slams into a sign, dying in the process. May Mr. the Weasel Hunting Sniper rest in peace. Anyways, I'm done being stuck between bleh and angry guy on the street because now it's time for my absolute favorite zone, Red Volcano Zone. I could point to a lot of things I love about this zone. I love the aesthetics. The mix of a volcano and a jungle does a lot for me. The music is great as always. It does an amazing job of creating hazardous platforming challenges without feeling too stop and start. It isn't overly reliant on a gimmick and just has really good level design with a great sense of flow. And the rolling ball gimmick it does have is actually pretty fun. In retrospect, this zone is pretty much Green Flower Extreme Edition in terms of how it's designed, but I think at the end of the day, the core of my enjoyment with this zone is impossible to explain. It's like how I feel playing Granblue Versus or Frog Gaming. I can point to a lot of things I enjoy about this zones, but other zones can and do have these things. But for some reason, this one always makes me happy whenever I get to it. It does have one major flaw though. It doesn't affect my unconditional love for the zone, but it is still a flaw. Due to the ongoing development of SRB2 and the massive work done for the 2.2 update on the rest of the game, this zone still only has one act. No Act 2, no boss. Once you board that rocket ship at the end, it's off to the penultimate zone. Now, I did just say that Egg Rock is the penultimate zone, but in reality, it's pretty much the final real zone of the game. The actual final zone consists of a non-standard stage and 2 boss fights. Egg Rock is your standard final zone affair. It's significantly harder than anything that came before, and due to taking place in space, features some gimmicks centered around that. First off is the anti-grav gimmick. It's exactly what it says on the tin. At certain points of the stage, your gravity will be flipped. Simple as that. For this, I highly recommend turning on the option that makes your camera flip with you when your gravity changes. The second gimmick is the outdoor section. Whenever you go outside, you'll instantly start running out of air and need to rush to a zone in order to refill it. In reality, these are basically just water sections. You can even use the elemental shield to prevent yourself from running out of air. Now, both of these gimmicks are introduced in Act 1, and the anti-grav specifically is mostly reserved for that act. So you may be thinking, gee, those are the 2 main gimmicks and one of them is pretty much only in Act 1? What's Act 2's claim to fame? And let me give you an answer. Act 2's claim to fame is being designed by someone going through a cocaine-induced psychosis. You know how people joke about people on coke writing screenplays? Imagine letting someone start a line and then design a final Sonic zone. Anti-grav and space sections for Act 1? Check! How about a tower climb where falling or getting hit in the wrong spot either kills you or sends you back in the level? Oh! What about a staircase where there's a pit waiting for you and you try to skip it by dropping down? Do you like Tetris? Here's a fucking Tetris wall that can crush you! This zone just fucking loves crushers and lasers towards the end. And not just the standard crushers that come from the ceiling either. Here's the fucking mall revolving door crushers. Hell, I've somehow managed to get crushed by the very first door in the act while recording footage. Look at this! Does this make even a lick of sense to you? Because it sure as hell makes no sense to me! Let's not forget the room where you're constantly under turret fire and need to move quickly! The space section right here is so stupidly tense my heart grew lent and walked out of my chest! The beginning of the stage lets you choose between 2 paths, but the one with fans might as well be blocked by a giant middle finger because the fans are so finicky that you're probably just gonna die anyways! And let's not forget the fucking Yoku blocks! Yoku blocks in a Sonic game! I cannot believe it! Literally 1987! And to top it all off, you have the most banger, I said, the most banger 80s montage music back in this whole gauntlet of insanity! I never really thought about how fucked up Egg Rock 2 actually is until this video. But I want to congratulate and refer whoever designed this level to a therapist, because they were clearly working something out here. This is bar none the single funniest stage in the game, because it feels like Eggman really wants Sonic dead. Like, really wants him dead. Less in the my arch nemesis way and more in the he took a dump on my lawn and will now pay the price way. As stated before, this is the final hurrah for standard zones, and it is quite the way to go out. With that, we're on to the final zone. Black Core 1 features a timeless setup, a race against Metal Sonic. It can be a bit tricky the first few times, but once you have the level design down, it honestly isn't that bad. Metal Sonic is fast and can ignore the spikes in the path, but he has no rubber banding to bridge the gap, so if you can get a lead and maintain it, you're pretty much at zero risk of losing. You also don't instantly lose if he reaches the end before you, but you have to hope he doesn't get too far ahead. Once he reaches a specific part of the stage, the oxygen will shut off and you'll only have 5 seconds to reach the end before suffocating. The amount of times I've barely just not made it to the finish line is innumerable. Act 2 is the penultimate boss fight. It's still against Metal Sonic, but this time, you're locked in a cage match. This fight works a bit differently from the other fights. It can be a bit frustrating and time-consuming due to the weird hit detection and chance for bad positioning to screw you over. In order to actually hit Metal Sonic, you first need to play a game of chicken. Jumping into him will make him dash to another part of the arena, leaving him vulnerable. This is a bit finicky since you need to jump directly into Metal Sonic or else it won't count at all. And he won't just come straight at you. He will move out of the way. You also have to manage your speed carefully. Go too fast while trying to trigger his dash, and you might just slam into the fence, or potentially even clear it entirely and die. Aside from the short portion at the start of the fight where you can get in multiple hits without retaliation, every hit will result in Metal flying up to rain down energy balls on you. Each hit changes the pattern of the projectiles as well as how many waves he fires. When he enters his pitch phase, he stops doing this in favor of pinballing around the arena. This isn't super hard to dodge if you just jump a bunch. You don't even really need to pay too much attention to where he is, so just spamming jump and occasionally stopping to pick up your rings in the unlikely event that you get hit is a sound strategy for this attack. After beating Metal Sonic, you walk down a final hallway, attempt to grab the emeralds, fall into an obvious trap, and are dropped into the final boss, Brack Eggman.
Every single drop of all you got, every single drop of all you got, every single bit of all you have, every single bit of all you have.
Brack Eggman is interesting because he's the biggest wet fart your game could end on. The mech is based on the one from the OVA. It's cool looking, but the actual fight is honestly pretty lame. Before you can hit him, you need to bring down his shield. There are 3 spots on the map that acid occasionally rains down from. You need to bait him under the acid rain to disable the shield, after which you can hit him. Doing this is a bit finicky, however, as he needs to be dead center in the spot where the acid comes down from, or else it's not going to count. Hitting him after his shield goes down will cause him to retaliate by either firing rockets at you or using a flamethrower, both of which leave flames on the ground. These attacks are incredibly easy to dodge, and the flames they leave only present a vague threat. You can also get a lot of hits in before his shield goes back up, so the fight can also be pretty short. When he enters pinch mode, the walls in the arena go down, he starts moving faster, and he gains 2 new attacks which replace his old ones. The first is an attack where he lobs a bomb that explodes into smaller bombs that explode into flames. The second has him pull up a targeting reticle before blasting you with an instant attack. You dodge this by hiding behind one of the small bits of cover in the arena. Honestly, the biggest threat in this phase is accidentally going too fast and knocking yourself out of the arena when you hit him. It sucks, because like I said, the mech is cool, but it's just so easy to avoid his attacks and just slam him with a bunch of damage. I found out while researching for this video that in between a certain threshold, he actually randomly chooses from attacks from both of his phases, but you can deal so much damage after bringing his shield down once that he's pretty much only going to use the second phase's attacks afterwards. Once you beat him, an escape pod appears. Enter the pod and you've beaten the game. The only real difference between the good and bad endings are the fireworks display when the base explodes and the very last screen after the credits, so getting the Chaos Emeralds is basically just for the super forms or 100% speedruns. We may have beaten the game, but we're not done just yet. I alluded to it while talking about the emblems, but this game features a ton of really cool unlockables. Meeting certain requirements in-game or collecting enough emblems will unlock various new modes, stages, and even new characters. Beating Green Flower Zone gives you Record Attack, which allows you to set time, ring, and score records on stages and unlock even more emblems. Beating any special stage will unlock the Knights mode, which changes your goal from just getting the Emerald to trying to get a high score and high ranks, just like real Knights. Beating Fang and Metal Sonic unlocks them as playable characters, and they aren't the only unlockable characters either. Finally, you can unlock a whole bevy of bonus stages through emblems and beating other bonus stages. Getting 5 emblems gives you Frozen Hillside, for example, and beating that gives you our final playable character, Amy. The cool thing about the unlockable characters in particular is that not only do their playstyles make them vastly distinct from the main trio, but Amy and Fang specifically have new routes tailored to their new moves and lack of spin dash. Playing as those two gives you an entirely new experience even outside the novelty of a new playstyle, which goes a long way in making them feel more worthwhile. There's a lot of stuff to unlock, but I'd rather you see it for yourself. After all, earning it yourself is half the fun. It's kinda hard to quantify just how much SRB2 has permeated throughout my life. As a kid, I played the pre-2.2 versions. As a teenager, I dove back in with the 2.2 update, and as an adult, I've been consistently coming back for more, to the point where I felt inspired to talk about the game at length. I didn't even touch on everything I could have in this video. Aside from all the content in the base game, this game has an absolutely fucking massive modding scene. Characters, stages, conversion mods, physics revamps. Some mods have even spun off into their own things like SRB2 Kart. All the different ways you can experience the game at even more value. But the base game by itself is still a mainstay of my library. It's a game I can always go for one more run in. It is 100%, without a doubt, my favorite Sonic fan.